Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices focusing on the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Our presenter today is Mr. Jonathan Greenwald, who is the founder and managing director of Core Asset Group Limited Liability Corporation for over 30 years. As an entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and active investor, his career spans Wall Street, telecommunication, institutional real estate, clean energy technologies, university advisory roles, as well as hands-on philanthropy. Core Asset Group pursues common sense, value-driven investment practices, which are opportunity-driven. Its compact size has enabled Mr. Greenwald to move quickly and identify opportunities in both traditional and emerging sectors. With expertise in investment risk management and merchant banking in several fields of focus, the company benefits from Mr. Greenwald's accumulated years of insight and hands-on management of startups and operational businesses. I would like to know your thoughts as a philanthropist on people's responsibilities, not only to themselves, but to others. Do you think that this is where it needs to begin, or is it possible to educate people even when they are brought up in different circumstances?
So the short answer is yes. And it's yes to both and more. One, I do believe that every human has a capacity to assist others, regardless of the size of their wallet or their checkbook. Everyone knows someone, everyone has some extra time that they can volunteer and donate into areas that they feel passionate about. I believe by giving, the giver gets more than they gave. So it's really a reciprocal energy transfer to assist others. As far as different areas of focus, unfortunately, the world is not and never will be short of great worthy causes. Obviously, humanitarian aid in times of disaster is one of the paramount, because if we don't assist people to get through an immediate crisis, tomorrow doesn't really matter. It's only for today. But we also have to be looking forward towards tomorrow as well. You had mentioned, Dr. Durbak, you had mentioned schooling. So I believe that education is one of the most important tools that people can share. We have 2 or 3 things in life that we never get back: time and health. If we wasted time, we're never getting it back. And if we've lost our health, unfortunately, we're not getting it back. A lot of other things come and go. Education allows people to break cycles of poverty or misinformation or hatred, which drives a lot of conflicts. Most conflicts in the world tend to be driven by either a scarcity of resources, a scarcity of education, or fear of the others. Today, we live in an amazing world where through technology, we can provide education and school initiatives on a global basis remotely. I had our first initiative in education was in 1998 with an organization called Schools Online, where we're using the precursor to the cloud. Back then we called it ASP, where we would provide curriculums online, and we would take children from conflict areas and have the children, the students, they're mainly high school students, collaboratively work on particular curriculums in mixed groups. They were doing it initially virtually, But by working through the programs and working through the challenges, they quickly learned that one person's problem was identical to the other person's problem, and one person's solution was also the same solution that worked for them. At the end of the program, the students would learn that they still may not disagree, but they no longer feared each other, they respected each other, and many of them formed amazing bonds. So education, I think, is one of the paramount opportunities, especially if we can do it in an open and transparent way. And with technology, it allows people in Mongolia to communicate with someone in Ukraine on areas of interest, but we do just need to provide the tools, and the people will figure it out themselves. Tools and guidance.
Well, one of the big problems is that we do not focus on educating people, how should I put it, in the understanding of what they need to know in order to be good citizens. And I think that that is a problem, particularly in American schools, where they seem to be focusing on things that are really not that relevant, as opposed to issues that will teach them how to be good citizens and to do that is good for the entire community.
No, absolutely. And you certainly opened a big Pandora's box. You'd mentioned the US will stay out of politics, but it comes back to basic civics. And we no longer teach in this country and much of the Western world basic civics. The United States is a very unique political system, unlike anything else in the world, where people often refer to the US as a democracy, and that's not correct. The United States is a unique creature, that we're a constitutional republic, which is very different than a democracy. In a democracy, majority rules, and the minority at the end of the day have no rights. In the United States, we have this very unique, complex system that's often misunderstood and rarely taught in schools anymore.
Right.
In that, one, the U.S. Constitution is a unique
document. It's really a unique, it's like a Bible. It's a unique document.
Correct. And under the Constitution, and again, I don't want to digress, but I think it's important to what you were
please
asking.
go right ahead, because I think that this is very, very important, especially for the young people that are listening, even though they might not understand it fully. But one of the things that I do, I send the Constitution to all of my students in Ukraine and Moldova or the other place where I support students. I send them the Constitution.
Amazing. And the Constitution itself, what most people don't realize is the Constitution does not give citizens any rights. It's understood that every U.S. citizen has all of the rights without the government. The Constitution gives the government a very limited number of rights. So where in most countries in the world, citizens are effectively vassals to the government, in the US, it's flipped. The government, the federal government, has very limited powers under the Constitution, and the individuals have all of their freedoms to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In a constitutional republic, we have this very interesting thing called the Electoral College, where it protects the small states from the tyranny of the big states. And it was formed because the founding fathers of the United States were deathly afraid of tyranny that they just went through under King George. And they wanted to make sure that everyone had their own independence, and that government elected officials were we're servants for the people. They're representatives of the people, not the rulers of the people. Very, very different world. We've seen it all flipped on its head. And it really accelerated in 1979 with the creation of the Board of Education, where back in 1979, the United States educational system was in the top 5 of the world. Since 1979, we've dropped as a nation at least a point a year. Now, the hope, Dr. Durbak, that you had asked, the hope for everyone, but particularly for people in the formative years, and particularly even for people who've gone through a system that has been educational system that has been leaving out important, inconvenient facts. What I would tell my daughter from the youngest age was I wouldn't tell her what to think. I would always encourage her to stay intellectually curious and intellectually honest. Now, intellectually curious is pretty easy. We have access to information from around the world. The key, though, is to know your sources and make sure you check sources that people tell you not to look at or don't agree with. God gave us this gray matter between our heads that allows us to think. So get information from a lot of people and then use common sense and start following facts. And often the facts wind up with follow the money at the end of the day. And when you do those two things, you gather information, you use common sense, you turn off the TV because there are no real news stations anymore. They're really op-ed pieces of different points of view. But if you gather information from yourself, you process it and you say, does this make sense? Does it not make sense? Let me dig a little deeper. You'll come to conclusions that may reinforce your own beliefs. They may challenge your beliefs. They may shatter your beliefs. So to stay intellectually honest is to accept the information that one does at the end of multiple experiments and realize if the outcomes don't align with our prior conceptions, maybe we have to rethink our thought process or our belief system in that particular field. That could be in politics, that could be in education, that could be in cooking, that could be in fashion. It could be virtually anything we want. But if someone practices that religiously, the process will inevitably lead to the right or most likely right conclusions, even though it may not be the popular view. It's very easy to want to go along with a crowd, but being a contrarian often allows you to ask, what am I not seeing or what are they not seeing? In a former part of my life, I used to be a commodity and a derivative trader. And we would use algorithmic models to come up with models to give predictive valuations of, let's say, the price of gold as an example. When we would often see that the entire world were bullish or thinking that the gold would keep going up, it would create scenarios where one was being paid to go against the crowd. The reason is when everyone is leaning one way on a boat, the boat tends to lean that way. And if there's any sort of correction, it's going to be very violent in the other direction. So being a contrarian creates very interesting opportunities, points of view, business opportunities to do things, see things that everyone else has been sort of brainwashed into disbelieving. In statistics, there's something called bell-shaped curves,
Yeah.
and standard deviations, and we're taught in the regular world, and it's a way to measure volatility and variation from the mean.
The variant trend.
Correct, and we're taught that the world, 95% of all the world's events are captured within 3 sigma standard deviations.
Right.
But in the financial markets, in science, there are 6 sigma variations that happen all the time, but they're inconvenient and challenging. So people just push them away until there's another economic crisis or someone invades a country, even though people said you wouldn't do it, but it can happen. So we should never assume just because it hasn't happened, it won't happen. There's a theory about black swans. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't happen. In fact, most likely what happened before won't happen again the same way, but it will happen because history does repeat itself. The technologies change, the names change, the locations change, but humans never change. We're the constant. So I think it's important for people to learn how to think for themselves, learn how to use critical thinking, logic, others. If they're in a room where everyone agrees with them, I would challenge everyone to find another room because there's no value in that room anymore.
I absolutely agree with you. One of the things because I see that we have loads and loads of questions, so I am going to transfer that to Ariel. But I just wanted to add that one of the big problems that I think that we have, that we do not have a very rigorous educational system for the teachers. Because I think that this is where it starts. And if you have excellent teachers, you will have excellent products. I would like to transfer to Ariel. Ariel, please be so kind and ask all the questions. I hope that we'll have time for as much as possible. Ariel, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Durbak, and thank you so much, Mr. Greenwald. This has been such an incredible presentation, and I'm very excited to ask the following questions. So to start, do you think that the UN could have been more helpful in helping the private sector and foundations like yourself? And what are the lessons that you've learned from your experience?
Wonderful question. Let me, as a typical New Yorker, let me answer a question with a question. Are we speaking in particular dealing with the current Ukraine crisis, or are we talking in general?
If you could answer both, I think that would be really interesting. I mean, I think the question was pertinent to the Ukraine crisis, but I would also be curious to know how you're feeling in general as well.
Sure. So thank you. So the UN on paper has the ability to be a remarkable organization and do remarkable things. In practice, like all large organizations, they tend to get inefficient through bureaucracy and silos. So streamlining is a challenge. In relation to Ukraine, we were fortunate, well, it's a mixed blessing. We were fortunate in that we were able to fly many pallets, a lot of supplies, medical supplies, on UN charters from the US to Poland. And that was wonderful. So we got them there in 2 or 3 days, only to be lost for 3 months inside of a bureaucratic paper nightmare. And had we done it our own way via private sector and done it by ship, we would have had the supplies there actually sooner. There was no ill intent. It was just too many cooks in the kitchen without proper logistics and coordination. That said, there are many opportunities for the UN to operate as a, I would call it a traffic cop, better than anything else. One of the things that I try to do at TIGFIF is I try to create smart partnerships. And my definition of smart partnerships are, I try to work with other organizations that have overlapping areas of interest, but not redundant, almost like a Venn diagram. So if we were to do overlaying Venn diagrams, and we happen to be really good at a particular thing, i.e., sourcing 500 hospital beds. And one of my other colleagues at Aviators Without Borders happens to be really good at moving 500 hospital beds. Now, we've moved hospital beds, but they're better at it than us. So we ask them to do that. And we then have a third or fourth partner on the ground in Ukraine who will actually deliver the hospital beds for us. So we try to eliminate a lot of overlap. We try to eliminate a lot of redundancies, and we make it more efficient in the process. I think the UN can play a tremendous role in that, both in having vetted NGOs in place already, not only in response to a crisis, but in planning for the next crisis. So on a global basis, if the UN voluntarily, of course, would have a database of vetted NGOs, when, God forbid, the next earthquake happens in Haiti or a volcano in St. Vincent's, we were there last year as well, immediately within 24 hours, there were these 50 qualified NGOs that we all know of, and people can immediately be operating together. So I think from a database and a networking standpoint, the UN can play a remarkably better role instead of having to go through committees that can take weeks and months, and the crisis has already moved on.
Well, you're absolutely right. We are working now with UNFPA in Ukraine and with UNDP, and it has, and some of the people there are absolutely excellent, and they do work. I think Ariel's question had more to do with the fact that the Security Council is still stuck with Russia being a permanent member, and it takes 2/3 of the General Assembly to be able to limit the role. And that is, I think, one of the biggest problems that the UN has right at this moment. But Ariel, please continue on with the questions.
Thank you. Have you found any success in fundraising or educating via social media, as those are the biggest platforms for youth, for engagement, any of that type of stuff?
Also, great question. The answer is absolutely yes. In the early days of a crisis, social media is phenomenal for fundraising. But crises get old very quickly for donors. So in the first days and weeks, afterwards, they're out of sight, out of mind. And people, in general, humanity has a very short attention span. I don't know too many people who can read books anymore, let alone just seeing a quick, trope on some social media thing. So social media is very, very valuable in initial awareness and spreading the word about something. Education's more challenging. If you're educating, and there too, we have so much purely vetted information on the web and social media that just because it's on the internet doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So the education is harder, and it goes back to what I said earlier. You have to use critical thinking and go through the personal process. Why is it? What are they? Who are they? Does it make sense? I will tell you, unfortunately, in Ukraine, in the first 2 months, the amount of humanitarian aid that wound up on the black market is it's beyond despicable. That's one of the reasons why we go through a verification process and a vetting process, and we actually require people to send us video and others of the actual aid we're delivering. So I think the short answer is invaluable, especially in the early days. The educational side is going to be topic specific, and you really want to have either subject matter experts, but they're often local. So if we're dealing with a crisis in the US, we did not see what was happening in Kharkiv. We were not seeing what was happening. We were not seeing what was happening in Mariupol. We saw a little bit, but we didn't really see. So
It's very, very difficult in those areas. Keep in mind that they were controlled by the Russians, and there was a tremendous amount of stealing and looting, besides killing and murdering people and destroying everything. Whatever we send to a verified organizations, through UN, FPA, through UNDP, through the Knights of Lviv, whom I personally know, and through the people that I have been working with, because I have a scholarship program throughout Ukraine. So we are very, very careful, but you're absolutely right.
Unfortunately, wars are horrible things, and any war, and there is the fog of war, and there are certain people, a small percentage of humans, but they view war as a business opportunity.
So one of the students from Ukraine had wrote, Mr. Greenwald, thank you and the other people who are helping our people in this difficult time. You're doing very important things. How do you feel when you see videos of people that you've helped?
No, thank you. It's a great question. It's very mixed emotions. I'm both honored and touched that we're able to assist, and truthfully, I feel bad that we can't do more.
There's another question here pertaining to that. Why do you think people are often insensitive to the humanitarian problems of other countries? That's another question from Ukraine.
Also, great question. I think it has nothing to do with Ukraine. I think it has to do with humanity and mankind, and that we live in our own little bubbles, and something far away from us is less important. I think we are creatures of social media. I think we're told what we should care about, what we shouldn't care about. Goes back to what I said about critical thinking and intellectual curiosity. There's no shortage of worthy causes around the world. I think we need to, every person has an opportunity to educate themselves into things that touch their heart. So we do certain things out of, we're just supposed to, I guess, as human beings, it's just what we're supposed to do. But there are certain other things that we do that are passion projects, where we support a lot of artists here in Miami, and we incubate them in our gallery, just because. So that's a passion project for me, but different people have different passion projects. But a lot of it just has to do with fear of the unknown, far away. And quite frankly, every human, no matter what situation they are in life, they're busy, they have other challenges.
Thank you. Now, there are a lot of scammers among volunteers. How do you distinguish them, and how do you understand who is who?
Also a great question. It really depends what the volunteer is, what they're doing, what the situation. So for us, we do have volunteers who come to our warehouse. They assist us with sorting, packaging, loading things. Maybe people care or don't care about the mission. Maybe they want their own social interaction with other volunteers. But at the end of the day, the greater good is being served because we're providing, we're getting work done. When it comes to actually delivering goods to an end user, we will go through a vetted NGO that we hopefully either have a relationship with, or we can get references on fairly quickly. So in Ukraine, I'll give you two examples. So we primarily only work with organizations that have been properly registered with the state. That also includes NGOs in Poland as well that we have to use as transport. At the same time, I had the opportunity to meet a woman in Saudi Arabia last March, and a real estate developer, Russian by birth, living in Vienna. They were in the process of developing a building. The war broke out. They immediately took in about 60 or 70 refugees from Ukraine. They're not an NGO. They were nothing. A month later, I had the opportunity to be in Budapest, and we drove a truckload of supplies from Budapest to Vienna, delivered it to the children. Probably one of the most rewarding things that we had done, because here you saw totally volunteers, totally outside of the norm, paying with their own pockets, and we saw the kids. We saw the kids that we're delivering to. But a volunteer who shows up at a warehouse and says, "I need food, I'll bring it to so-and-so," we usually ask them to go away.
Thank you. You had mentioned before that you help Russian children as well. Has the need for humanitarian aid in Russia increased since the war began? And if so, how?
So we would like to assist any refugees inside of Russia. We are not doing much inside of Russia, but we're working with a lot of Russians who've left Russia via Georgia. A lot of them are in the United Emirates today, in Dubai, and we assist there. The need inside of Russia has gone up dramatically for the average person. Sanctions have shut down a lot of things, a lot of commodities, a lot of smaller businesses have been hurt and damaged. The oligarchs are not hurt. They don't care. It doesn't matter. Instead of having 10 billion, they have 4 billion or 6 billion. They're still billionaires. Their life moves on. They lost 2 yachts. They have 6 more. It doesn't matter. But the average person, we know a lot of people in right over the border from Kharkiv, where their businesses have been destroyed because it's a dangerous area now. And so to the extent that we can assist, we do, but it's primarily outside of the country. Also, because of the way Russia is managed and monitored, people need to be very, very careful. So let's say in New York and in Miami, there are very large expat former Soviet Union communities. Many of them have relatives inside of Russia. If the relatives in New York are actively protesting, it can have ramifications on the relatives in Moscow. So one has to be very careful.
Thank you.
That is correct. You're right. Especially when you're hearing about the Russians taking and stealing children and young people and transferring them to Russia at the beginning. That has been horrendous.
In your opinion, Mr. Greenwald, what should students in schools and universities globally learn about humanitarian relief? Big question.
Love this question. One, we can all benefit by looking back at history and seeing in past crises the way others were able to assist in them. A lot of times it's going to be a community organization, usually around either a national or an ethnic collective connection. So for instance, here in Miami, out of our disaster relief warehouse, we support a lot of the Caribbean. Each country has its own communities here in Miami. So anytime there's a hurricane in country X, that community comes together very quickly. As far as students around the world, I would definitely say, look at history, see what worked, see what didn't work. There's an expression about the road to hell is paved in good intentions.
Yeah.
When we look back at the first earthquake in Haiti, and that's actually how our larger organization got started. We were the first first responders. The Miami Beach Fire Department was the first ones in Haiti, because some guy went to the mayor and said, "Let's do this. Can we?" The firemen said yes. They were on a plane the next day, and they just went. No one even knew what the mission was going to be. 12 years later, we still have an operation there. But there we saw the country was flooded with hundreds of millions of dollars. The UN still has a very large operation there.
Yeah.
And I am absolutely convinced that aid and the UN is continuing to destroy the country, because things were given away as opposed to people were taught to earn it or work for it. So it's merit-based versus just entitlement. I work with the UN in Haiti, and if the UN were to pull out and half of the money paid to the UN staff, just half of the money were given to vetted NGOs locally, that country would be dramatically better placed today.
I agree.
But it's a big business.
I was there. I was in Haiti doing that, so I completely agree.
Yeah, my last time was there 18 months ago. I try to go back, but I'll probably be going back very soon. But I think learn from what worked, what didn't work. And again, critical thinking.
Thank you. So you had mentioned before, which I agree with, that social media and just in general, our society has a much shorter time span. We've become desensitized to, international issues that aren't within our personal awareness bubbles. So how would you recommend getting those bubbles to pop a little bit more, and how would you incentivize more people to kind of pursue the topics that they're passionate about and make an impact within the philanthropy world, even in a little way?
No, amazing. And there is no little way, because we never know where one thing starts. Every avalanche started with a snowball, right? So we don't know. Every leader is one person, and then suddenly there might be a mob behind them. It starts with one. I would say cultural diplomacy is probably the key common denominator. What do we have in common globally? Music, literature, dance, food, virtually everything that the government hasn't figured out how to control yet. And I would start in any of those areas: poetry, painting, art, and let people find their passion area. And because of technology today, you could easily merge with other people, meet with other groups across the globe, and then start to find commonality. And suddenly, the value of the internet, the value of the internet is the value of any network, which is the internet, is the number of points of connectivity. So 1 + 1 + 1 is 2, 2 and 2 is 4, right? 4 and 4 is 8, but at some point it goes exponential. So when people have multiple links around the world, usually without necessarily a particular purpose, at some point in the future, that connection becomes very valuable for that purpose in that moment.
That's very, very true. And I know Ariel particularly is very, very focused on it. But I agree with you, between art, music, paintings, and ability to understand and relate with one another, and understand that humans are humans wherever we are. That's so very important. You're absolutely correct. Back to you, Ariel.
Thank you. So back to your partnerships, because you had mentioned some pretty big names. How did you find your partnerships, and how would you suggest for other, smaller foundations or smaller initiatives in creating those type of partnerships?
Most of the relationships, most of the partnerships, and some of the partnerships were one-off. It just happened one time. But it's through human relationships. Going back to cultural diplomacy, it could be that a friend who is a rock and roll fan with me, and we would go to concerts together once in a while. Turns out he or she is head of logistics at a major corporation, and suddenly a disaster happens, and I reach out to Mark. I say, Mark, here's what we're doing. Can you guys help? And often within 24 hours, we get an answer, and it's often an affirmative. But it usually comes from having already some relationships. We all know people. In the early days of the war, a colleague of mine in South Korea knew someone in Ukraine who is a chef. The chef gave up his restaurant and immediately started operating field kitchens, and they were feeding 1,000 soldiers a day. We had food in Budapest, and we were able to send it over to them simply because I knew someone in South Korea who happened to know a chef. If I went looking for that field kitchen, I never would have found it. So it's just who we know.
Thank you.
And one last thing, what I would say is one of the most valuable things today in universities, high schools, universities, not necessarily even the curriculums they're teaching us anymore, certainly not in the US, but it is the relationships that you can form, and done correctly. And it should be out of careness. These relationships can serve people the rest of their careers for a variety of reasons. Because it is an opportunity to meet people that we wouldn't normally meet, and we're typically meeting them at a time when no one has an agenda, or they don't have that agenda. And in college, I guess people have agendas, but it's a different agenda.
Thank you. Well, what is your proposed solution for food and water insecurity issues? And what is currently the biggest challenge to global water security?
Wow, big question. Really have to unpack it. It depends on how we define water security. So water security, let's say in New York City, is very different than water security in Uganda, where in New York City, there's a certain requirement of a certain scale. And in Uganda, it can be delivering 5 liters a day to 3 families. So we have a lot of different things to do. You have very large scale projects that are providing water to hundreds of thousands of people at once. And then you also have much smaller scale, especially when you're dealing with people in remote areas off a grid. Technology is going to be the solution. Efficiency is going to be the solution. Often the best isn't necessarily the most technologically advanced is not always necessarily the most efficient. I think it really is a case by case situation, but conservation matters. And it's not just in acquiring water, purifying water. I mean, there is not a lack of water in the world. There's a lack of safe drinking water, but 2/3 of the Earth's surface is covered with water. So, and there are technologies to desalinate, but I think it has to be the right solution for the right situation. And does it make, at the end of the day, also economic sense to be doing certain things? So for instance, if someone wants to grow, I don't know, tomatoes in the middle of the desert, and tomatoes use a huge amount of water, and maybe someone should say, don't grow tomatoes in the desert.
A very, very good point, that you really need to know what you're doing. But there is a problem, because through fracking, we are affecting the groundwater system. And you are right, we are creating a problem with drinking water, which we have as yet not resolved.
In a similar light, what are the factors that you see that are contributing to food insecurity? And what solutions would you see there?
Also great question, also very complex question. It really depends. So we do want to start to go back to a certain amount of decentralization of food production on a global basis. We do want to go back to more nutritionally quality foods, as opposed to they make you feel full, but they're not doing anything for you. Centralization, I do think, hurts. But again, there are 2 different regions of the world are better suited for different ways. Today, we do have tremendous technologies. We're really just getting there, where we can replace most farming with indoor farming for most crops. When you do that in the right environment, and by the way, the next billionaires or millionaires or the next .com wealthy people, I predict are going to be farmers, not necessarily all coders. When you can grow in an urban environment products using 95% less water, without fertilizer, without pesticides, without having to use infrastructure and trucks to ship it from 300 miles away, where half of it spoils, and you're creating jobs in urban environments again, I believe those are ways that we start addressing a lot of the food insecurity issues in the world. There are certain parts of the world, because of just shifting climates and that are no longer arable lands. That's a different situation. There are technologies that can assist there, and we are seeing population movements as well. So I think it's again, complex question, but I do believe technology, science, hard work will get us there.
Thank you. In your opinion, how can the governments of other countries influence the resolution of the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine?
Really big question. It really depends. I think every government can certainly be providing certain humanitarian aid, food. The winter's coming. The winter's here already. So blankets, warm clothing, basic necessities, mattresses, things that people need to get through the winter, and others. Every government has relations. Enemies, well, friends don't make peace, enemies make peace. And enemies often need an intermediary to get there. And it may not be that the US, good, bad, and different, is the right person, group, organization, or France, or Britain to try to get to an end of hostilities, whatever that looks like. But every country has its own relationships. Every country has its ambassadors. I think they can be publicly assisting on humanitarian aid and quietly working behind the scenes on a personal level that should never come out to the light of day.
Thank you. On a bigger note, what do you see as the main causes of humanitarian crises in the world, and how can we prevent them and or solve them?
Wow. Unfortunately, life's not fair. And I think since the beginning of time till the end of time, there will be humanitarian crises. But through cooperation and collaboration, we can absolutely mitigate many of them, and we can respond very rapidly. Some are man-made, some are natural disasters. Man-made, we have to just be smarter in how we do things. Goes back to critical thinking and using common sense. I won't go there now, but I'm not a big fan of electric vehicles, although I do believe that we have much better technologies than gasoline. But that's a whole different story for different reasons. But governments have backed it very heavily. And in 15 years, we're not going to have any solution for disposing of these highly toxic batteries. And we're destroying countries mining the rare earths to make these highly toxic batteries. So, but money is pushing it. There's other technologies, green hydrogen, other things that are clean, green, sustainable. The other is when it comes to a natural disaster, have rapid response. Have more people cooperating with rapid response. Things happen, typhoons, earthquakes, hurricanes, buildings collapse. Every country has its ability to send help rapidly.
Thank you. If there was one thing we could do after this webinar to contribute to making a difference, what would you say that would be?
I would say set up some form of group chat to take the momentum created from this conversation and have the future leaders to be able to ask questions, seek mentors, what worked, what didn't work. You know, the difference between being smart and wise is experience. So you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but if you watch the movie enough times, you're going to know how it ends. So when you have newer entrants into an area, let's say humanitarian aid, with great ideas, great passion, a lot of times asking someone who's been around for a while can cut through a lot of issues or accelerate a great idea. So I think some sort of way that people can continue to communicate.
I am out of questions from the students, but I myself do have one more question for you, which is back to social media and also back to what you had said about the farmers kind of being the new wave in the .com area and all of that. What platforms do you think have been the most helpful in driving philanthropy, in driving that humanitarian aid? And what platforms do you see in the future being a main driver of those?
Great question. I can tell you what platform is not, and that would be TikTok. I urge people to we're talking about education, and on TikTok, we're often being taught to be foolish and unproductive and, quite frankly, silly and dangerous. So I do not think that's useful. I think platforms are many. We work on many. Oftentimes, it's just using either a variant of LinkedIn and or WhatsApp, but several of the other platforms, Signal groups, Telegram groups. Facebook used to be better, but unfortunately, Facebook, YouTube will censor you if for some reason you've crossed the red line of some censors are. So you wind up with groupthink, and they don't like deviating opinion or someone at a lockstep. I don't have a particular platform that works great that we use. I wish I had a better answer for you on that one.
Now, I have a follow-up question for that, though, which is you had said TikTok was the #1 no platform. But with TikTok, the one interesting thing in its structure is that a trend on TikTok could get 2 billion views, 40+ million likes. And that kind of engagement has not been even close to done, except for with YouTube on any other platform. And so do you see any way of, kind of trying to mesh what educational content we know would work in other platforms with, this silly trends that we're seeing on TikTok in a way that can kind of still engage youth and maybe turn the platform to a more educational purpose?
Yes. And the other problem with TikTok, again, I'm biased, but the other problem, as I see with TikTok, and it's not TikTok bashing, is that yes, they may get a massively trending story. Once that happens, though, one gets sucked into this TikTok universe, and it's very distracting. And I had said earlier that there are two things that are in scarcity and we can't get them back: time and health. And I believe TikTok is a time vampire. It just, we could be doing a lot of other things. You could be reading War and Peace, but instead it's very easy to watch this one trending thing, and suddenly 6 hours later, yeah. As far as though other ways to go, a lot of it is there are some very interesting platforms that I happen to like, and again, that I happen to like because it does provide, I believe, some alternative points of view to what you can see in the mass media. is there's a group, a platform called PragerU, as an example. If you're familiar with PragerU, I happen to know Dennis Prager for many, many years, Upper West Side guy. Now he lives in Miami sometimes, whatever. But it's again a platform that allows people to see different points of view. They have a lot of younger writers, authors. I suppose it's popularity, it's capitalism, right? So if they're not popular, they kind of go off the network. But if they are, they are. And I think it touches some of my core values about critical thinking and being intellectually curious and then intellectually honest. Don't have to agree with the lecturer or the professor, but if they get you thinking, that's a good thing. And so that's an example. I have nothing to do with PragerU, by the way, so I'm not plugging them. But I do think there are platforms like that. I do think that there are independent voices. I don't want to be a shill for a lot of people, but they do challenge, particularly what's going on in U.S. schools. This groupthink, they do challenge them, and it's amazing how quickly that they are blacklisted. What I would say is, intellectually, if someone sees a person who is not overly popular, but suddenly they get a huge amount of attention from the mainstream, and it's negative attention to crush them, there's probably someone that you should follow and watch and learn from. You may not agree, but there's a saying, when you start getting a lot of flak, anti-aircraft flak, it means you're over a target. So they are touching a nerve of a power group somewhere in the world. And it's always interesting to see what that is.
Well, thank you very, very much. All I can tell you, Mr. Greenwald, that you gave us a lot of food for thought, and some of it was just extremely important. And we hope that our listeners will have the opportunity to check again when it's on YouTube, and therefore review everything that you have said. It will be on YouTube within a couple of days. I am most grateful that you were able to make it from your busy schedule, and I do hope that we'll be able to get you to come once more to talk to us. Ariel, thank you very, very much for hosting. And I just want to mention the next week we will have one of our board of directors, Prof. Kabir Gupta, talk about the conclusions and results of COP 27. So have a very good week and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.